First up, as always, strip absolutely everything off it. Righto, so that would be phase one, I guess. Next up, it's all the little annoying things. I'd say that was a full day's work, like 7 AM to 5 PM's work, but it's totally stripped. Everything from the windscreen to the hatches, every railings, every bolt on it, all gone. So work out what I actually need to replace. Like I thought, these are pretty rotten, and yeah, a bit of other fiberglassing to do. So I'm going to hack into it now. As you can see, the floor had these lift-up panels above the fuel tank, which is massive. I want to replace them with solid Thermolite across the whole floor, so there aren't any hatches. Also got to rebuild the side pockets, the bottom ones and the top ones. They're the only rotten parts on it. So I'm going to sand down the edges here to make a really good platform to brought some Thermolite too. So as I said before, I want to fill in where the fuel tank hatches were with one big Thermolite cover. So I don't have that sort of inconsistent surface and it's just flow coat all the way across. So I've cut one big sheet of Thermolite, measured it probably 8 times at $300 a sheet. The problem I'm going to have here is getting it rigid enough to stand on and not bend under your feet. So I think the key is just going to be lots of coats, lots of layers of matte and resin on both top and the bottom. Now I've mixed up a full litre of resin, so with that much resin we've got to act fast. So I think I'm actually going to tip this instead of just rolling it all. The best sort of sanding and roughing or stripping disc I found were these stripping ones. Not so much those. This did a lot quicker job. So I've sanded down the whole fuel well in about probably half an hour it took me. Just to get sort of really good adhesion of the flow coat. So the first bit of flow coat we're going to do is just sort of in that fuel tank well. The flow coat I got was non-waxed, so I've mixed wax and catalyst. Big fuel tank's out. Now I'm planning to put in a sender. For that I have to drill through it. The young me would have just sent a hole saw through it with 200 litres of unleaded, but I might be getting a bit more cautious, so I'm filling it with water. So for the fuel tank, it sat on these sort of horizontal rubber strips, which is just stupid because any water that gets trapped in front of it can't flow out. So I got some offcuts from Clark Rubber. They're quite thick, so they'll sit the fuel tank up reasonably high and water can run out. Just siliconing them down now. So I've jumped ahead and put the fuel tank back in, but that's how sort of the fuel well or bilge
looks now. Now I found it needed 2 coats of the seagull grey flow coat. You could still see underlying colours through just 1 coat, so I needed 2. I also made care to seal up absolutely every screw hole here, forcing Cabasil into it and doing multiple coats of flow coat over it. I want the bilge completely watertight.
Okay, so I'm about to lay the big fuel tank panel down. Now I want it to sit pretty flush, but a bit sort of below the deck height, so I can make that up with sort of 4 or 5 layers of glass. So I had some old big washers floating around, so I'm going to use these as sort of guides. So it's laid, I've got it nice and level with all the bits angled, so now I can take them off and lay a bead of Cabasil around the outsides and lock it in. So I've just laid a good bead with the big syringe all the way around. So hopefully this will force it all the way down into there. So the reason I went so much effort to waterproof underneath the fuel tank and space it up so it can drain is I think water that pools in the bilge has a potential to run forward under it. It certainly does now. But also I'm changing the drain of this area in here from here that goes down into sort of the sub hull underneath, which I think has the potential to cause rot. I'm going to instead drain it straight through there so it just goes into the bilge. So ideally I want to keep all the water out of the sub hull, because I've noticed when you wash it down, I let that initial bead cure for the night, and then I went back this morning. I didn't record it unfortunately, laid another bead and then flattened it out with the trowel. So we've got a pretty flat surface, and from what I can tell there's about 3 mil of a depression, very consistent across where this panel sits. So now we can layer that up and get it totally flat. I've just laid 1 strand of just chop matting strip down. I'm gonna do 1 strand on the side, then a full length coat, and then another strip, and sort of sandwich them together. So really sort of reduce that chance of lamination. So that's the first layer of chop strand mat over the fuel tank cover. I decided to start with a much wider one. It sort of extends past sort of 5 or 6 centimeters on each side. That way, as I build up layers, smaller in the middle, they're always going to be sitting on this existing one. So even if there is a bit of a delamination. So this is after 2 additional layers of just chop strand matting and resin. As you can see, the whole cabin's sort of sanded back here as well. It's ready to do the flow coat, but there's going to be a whole separate episode on just doing the flow coat. So what I found is, even up the front, wood's all hard, it's dry, it's solid, drilled into it, there's no moisture in it. But in a lot of places, especially in the cabin, it's just flow coat over wood. They actually haven't put any layer of glass down. You can see there, it's a bit disappointing. So I'm going to coat the entire front half of the cabin with a layer of matrix matting and a much thicker layer of resin. Because yeah, once we lift it off, it's totally exposed. It was very dusty, but I've given it the whole front of the cabin an aggressive sand down with a 120 grit. So the next layer adheres to something, and a good sweep, and spend ages washing down with the acetone. So for the floor sections, I'm using the matrix matting, the biaxial matrix matting, sorry. It's really thick, easy to lay down on a flat surface. Up here for the shelving, I'm using sort of the mid-grade chop strand. It's a lot easier to bend around corners, which here we've got to deal with sort of just a straight corner. Now for the rest of these, I'm able to just do a stencil by lying them down. For sort of these harder bits, the best thing to use for a stencil, I reckon, is this. It's just like real estate agent sign. You can get it from Bunnings, it's a few dollars a sheet. Just gives a good rigid stencil, and it's cheap. So to get this stuck down and properly around this corner without unfolding and falling off and making a mess, I'm using this stuff. It's called Aerofix. So it's a spray-on adhesive, but it uses a polyester-based adhesive, so it will not interfere with the bonding when we put the proper polyester resin down. It's meant for this sort of thing, and as you can see, it worked really well here. I'll do a time lapse of it now, doing this side. It's just a normal video of what it allows you to do. Just roll by hand, and it adheres as it contacts. Roller's always handy. Okay, so the side panels and the shelves, they're all done. The matting wetted down really well, even though it was just adhered initially and then soaked through from the top. I just applied it with a set of basic fabric rollers. Next setup is the biaxial on the flooring. We are going to put a layer of resin down before it goes on, and it's all coming along well. Okay, well, I'd say the cabin side of it's done. A few kind of rough edges that'll need to be sanded and cleaned up tomorrow, but that's all right. It's all went together well. No sort of large gaps left. Yeah, needs a bit of a clean up though.